Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. Let's begin today's discussion of the comprehensive news analysis with the first article that is based on the theme that the developed nations around the world, be it America, European nations, China, Russia, mainly the P5 nations, are using their powerful positions across the world for their own good. They are undermining the concept of democracy, and rather than thinking about the world, they are thinking about putting their nation and their needs first. And that is why we are in a very dangerous situation around the world. The author is making a point that in this situation, India has an opportunity to play the mediator, to play the negotiator in a lot of conflicts that are going on around the world, especially because the developed nations don't seem to be providing a good leadership to the world right now. He starts his article by giving the current status. He is saying that there is an increasing demand from the nations across the world that Russia should be put out of the G20 group. As you know, G20 is the group of 20 members which are the most developed or the most advanced economies around the world, and India is also one of the members of the G20. Now, the Western nations have proposed that Russia, because of its invasion of Ukraine, which goes against the values of G20, should be forced to go out of G20. But without any surprise, China, which is again a G20 member, has opposed it. Now, how does India come in the picture? That is because India will be the chair of the G20 starting December 2022. And that is why India now has to play a key role in deciding whether or not some action has to be taken against Russia. Now, it's not like in a G20 summit, the president nation will decide everything. That is not how it happens. But just that, as the chair of the G20, India will play a key role in deciding the agenda on which discussions will happen. So, whether India would take up a stand on this issue or not, whether India would take a side of Russia or the other nations, or whether India would play the negotiator or the mediator remains to be seen. The author here says that G20 is just one of the many examples that we see around the world. You can talk about climate change, you can talk about poverty, you can talk about gender equality. On all these issues, we have had hundreds of summits across the world since the past few decades, but no concrete action has been taken. The reason for that is that the developed nations don't want to be magnanimous. The developed nations, in fact, have been using all the international organizations and platforms to meet their own ends. For example, you see in the UN Security Council, the P5 members keep on using their veto power whenever there is any discussion that they don't like personally. We have seen what happened recently when Russia is using these veto powers. We have seen in the past how China has used this veto power whenever India tries to make sure that a particular person is designated as a global terrorist who are harming India. We have also seen how US uses their veto power continuously whenever there is any issue against Israel's human rights record. So it's every single nation in the UNSC that has misused their power. Similarly, you can see how the World Bank and the IMF functions. Without the US approval, the IMF or the World Bank would not be able to take even their smallest of decisions. That is why we see how the international organizations are in the grasp of these P5 nations. I'll give you one more example. We have all heard of the International Court of Justice. Now, when the International Court of Justice gives their ruling as per the UN Charter, the responsibility of ensuring that the ruling given by the ICJ converts into reality and action is taken upon that ruling, that responsibility is of the UN Security Council only. But we have seen in the past, whenever there is an ICJ ruling against a P5 member, let's say China, America, then obviously no action is taken by the Security Council, which is a blatant violation of the concept of neutrality. So there are many examples around the world that show that world right now is not an ideal place. It's becoming more undemocratic as we say every single day. The article says that most of our international organizations that we see today, UN, GATT, which is now the WTO, the World Bank, IMF, all of these came up after the World War II. Although the idea was to make the world more democratic, but the victors of the World War very intelligently kept the veto power and the control over these organizations, and it has remained since then. After that, we have seen other organizations such as the G7, G20 come up, but even these organizations don't really make the world a better place. Although these organizations work on the concept of consensus and don't give anyone veto power, but even these organizations have not been able to take any concrete steps towards the betterment of the world. That is why we have seen, despite having better technologies, despite having much more knowledge about the world around us as compared to what we used to have, inequalities just keep on rising with every passing year. And the situation is becoming worse in every single country. Thus, all of a sudden, in many countries, we see that now politicians are going away from the values of democracy and human rights, and they are putting forward the idea of our nation first. Don't think about the other nations around the world. Don't think about international brotherhood. Just think about our own nation. And the bad part is that this ideology seems to be winning in many countries around the world. We saw what happened just a couple of weeks back in Hungary, where their Prime Minister Viktor Orban again won his fourth consecutive term, and he's a well known supporter of Vladimir Putin. He has openly said that Zelensky, that is a Ukrainian leader, is his enemy. This kind of a person has won elections the fourth time consecutively in Hungary. Similar kind of governments are now seen in Poland, Turkey, etc. That is an indication that people around the world also are voting for those leaders now that don't really talk about human rights, that don't really talk about international brotherhood. They mainly have to talk about putting our nation first and making ourselves as the greatest nation, and not even giving a second thought about the other nations around the world. And that is why we see, even during coronavirus pandemic, still there are many poor nations that don't have enough vaccines, when the developed nations are overflowing with the vaccine stock, and they are hoarding all these stocks for the future, not even knowing whether they would need it or not. But they're still not giving these vaccines to the least developed nations. That is an indication of the kind of world that we are living in. Thus, it should not surprise us that a nation like Russia chose to attack Ukraine. It should also not surprise us that hardly any other nation came to rescue Ukraine or Ukrainian people while they made their promises, while they kept on saying that Ukrainians are very courageous, but no one put their troops on the ground. Because we are living in a disordered world order right now. And as per the author, India can play a very crucial role in ensuring that the world goes back on its feet. Now, the problem is it's kind of an incomplete article. The heading here says that India has a role in the disordered world, but nowhere in the entire article does the author here mention what does India do, what steps should India take, or should India go forward in some way to ensure that this order becomes better. It's just a heading that India should do something, but what exactly should we do, what is our role, nothing of that sort has been mentioned here. So, because the article focuses mainly on the misuse of power by the developed nations, I thought of giving you certain examples of how the nations have misused their veto powers in the past. So, we all know that the permanent members of the UN Security Council, that is America, Russia, China, Britain, and France, have their veto powers. That is, when there is any discussion going on, they can use their veto. That means the proposal will be rejected. It doesn't matter even if all other nations support the resolution. Now, the first ever use of veto was in February 1946 when the Soviet Union used it. Now, historically, there is a view that Soviet Union has used the veto the most number of times. And that is why the Western nations don't really like the Soviet Union or Russia of today. However, if you see in the past couple of decades or so, the use of veto has diversified. For example, although China has only used veto 16 times in total, but till February of 2022, China used 13 veto votes since 1997. So out of its total 16 vetoes, 13 have been used in just the last 25 years. Similarly, we have seen America also increasing the number of vetoes that it is using. There have been a total of 293 vetoes used till now, that is until February of 2022, out of which 143 were solely used by Russia or the Soviet Union. The least, as you can see here, is China. Now, it is not just about the UN Security Council, as I said, in the IMF, World Bank, etc. The structure and the shareholding has been made in such a way that US has almost a veto power in the working of those institutions as well. So all of that needs to change, and we need to bring in a new world order. In fact, in political science, there is a phrase that is used quite a lot, that is NIEO. It is in fact a topic of political science optional as well, that is New International Economic Order. That means that there is a need to make new international economic bodies, ditch the World Bank, IMF and other such bodies because they cannot be made democratic and they will always work in the favor of those nations that won the Second World War. Now, because the article said that India can play a big role in the world affairs right now, I also wanted to share with you the fact that the Russian foreign minister, who was recently in India, said that India can play a mediator role between Russia and Ukraine. Although, as you would know by reading the world media, currently the mediator role between Russia and Ukraine is being played by Turkey. But the Russian foreign minister said that if India also wants to play such a role, they will be more than welcoming of India. The next article that we have here talks about care economy. Now, what exactly is care economy and what is it that the author is trying to say? The author here is saying that women in India largely have been seen in the role of caregivers, giving care to their family members, someone who is old, children, someone who is unhealthy. All these people need to be taken care of. Now, usually this role is taken up by the women in the family. However, the unfortunate thing is that it is an unpaid role and we do not regard it as a part of our formal workforce. And that is why we don't really give them the kind of credit that they need. Now, these caregivers can either be the members of the family, that is, the women living in the family, or someone from outside can also be hired to ensure that he or she works as a caregiver to the elders in the family or to the child in the family. You would have seen it's a common practice now in the metro city, especially that when there's a young couple who have a child, they want to hire a nanny or a helper to take care of the child. Now, that helper or that nanny is a caregiver. That is the concept that we are talking about. Most of them are women across the world. Now, the problem is that this is not a sector which we regard as a formal sector, which means that they don't really get the kind of employment benefits that they deserve. They don't really get the kind of job security that they deserve. If India and other nations across the world work towards that, it will have a lot of advantages. For example, it will increase the women labor force participation and will help us achieve the Sustainable Development Goal number 8. But for that to happen, we have to ensure that there are adequate policies formed in this regard, where India and many other nations across the world are still lacking. Now, this concept of caregiver has become even more relevant in India because of two reasons. Now, increasingly, the number of women who are working in our labor force in India are increasing, meaning that there's a very good chance, especially in metro cities, that if there is a couple, both the husband and the wife would be working. So they need someone who can take care of their child, especially because they are living in a nuclear family. Secondly, because of an increasing life expectancy in India, you see that the people are now living much longer. So someone who is in his 70s or 80s or 90s, these are people who also need a caregiver because again, their children might be working and they would not have enough time to take care of them. So people who are at the extreme ends of the spectrum when it comes to age, both these sections need someone to take care of them, and that is why care work is becoming increasingly relevant in India. Now, care work is covered under various international commitments such as the Sustainable Development Goals and also International Labour Organization's Centenary Declaration. In fact, in order to commemorate the International Women's Day, the ILO published a special report which was titled Care at Work, Investing in Care Leave and Services for a More Gender Equal World of Work. The report highlights the importance of maternity, paternity and even special care leave that is increasingly becoming a topic of debate in countries around the world, including India. Now, as far as the maternity leave part is concerned, thankfully, India is ahead of many of the nations across the world. It's a universal concept and it is a part of labor rights also. The International Labour Organization says that there should be at least 14 weeks of paid maternity leave given, and it exists in over 120 nations. India, in fact, has gone a step ahead, and India, as per the law, provides 26 weeks of maternity leave to women. Now, the problem with this is that it only applies to formal sector. So, women who are working in the informal sector, they don't get these kind of leaves. Only women who work as full-time employees in registered companies get this benefit. However, we still don't talk a lot about paternity leave. Now, in many countries, including India, paternity leave is not a concept. Paternity leave means leave to the father to take care of the child. Now, there are many private companies who do offer paternity leave from their end itself, but it is not a mandatory requirement by the government of India, as it is with maternity leave. We also have multiple laws that talk about setting up of creche at workplace so that the women don't have to leave their work just because they have to take care of the child. But even then, in most of the establishments in India, we don't see this kind of a facility being given. And even if it is given, it is only in a few chosen formal establishments. But in all these policies, we have still ignored the life of people who are working in the informal sector, especially the domestic workers. There is a government estimate of 2019 that says that 26 lakh domestic workers out of 39 lakh are female in India. That is about two-thirds domestic workers are actually female. And they need much better care, they need much better workplace policies in order to have a much better life. They don't really have any fixed leaves right now, they don't really have any employment facilities, and at many places they're expected to work much longer as compared to the normal working hours. All this needs to change and should be made a part of a government policy. Now, one interesting data in this article is that India spends less than 1% of its GDP on the care economy. And with increasing number of elders in the society, this number has to increase. We can also keep in mind what the International Labour Organization has suggested. The ILO has proposed a 5R framework for ensuring decent care work which is centered around gender equality. What are these 5Rs? Number one, recognition, reduction, and redistribution of unpaid care work. Unpaid care work means if a woman inside the household is ensuring or is doing this care work, that women also has to be recognized, paid, and should be a part of the formal work sector. Apart from that, it should be rewarding. So care workers must be rewarded for the quality of work that they are ensuring. And last, representation in the social dialogue. That means if government is making a policy for these workers, they should also be asked about their view and how would the policy be formed according to them. Now, when we talk about caregivers in India, we are mainly focusing on sections of population that are either old, unwell, or are too young to take care of themselves. So for now, let's focus on the elderly population in India. Now the fact is that as India's standard of living is increasing, as our medical healthcare facilities increase, as people earn more, the life expectancy of people in India will automatically increase. Earlier, you might have people dying of diseases such as diarrhea, etc. But now, you see that for many of these diseases, we have a cure available. So, people live longer. Meaning that the number of old age people in the country are increasing. Number of people who are not earning, who are dependent on the younger population to take care of them are increasing. That is why it becomes all the more important to have provisions to take care of such a population. WHO says that India's elderly population will rise from 6 crore to 22.7 crore by 2050. Meaning that all these people will be dependent on others to take care of them, to earn on their behalf, and to ensure that they have a good living. The Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, in its report titled Elderly in India 2021, says that the dependency ratio in India is increasing at the very high level. Now, in 2011, the government did recognize this and they introduced a national policy for older persons. Objectives were to ensure that they can make the provisions for themselves and their spouse during the old age, to encourage the families themselves to take care of the older family members, to bring in NGOs for caring for these people, to have healthcare facilities which are ready for the elderly, etc. All these have been put into motion since 2011, but still a lot more work has to be done in this field. The government also on its behalf has launched multiple initiatives which include the Indira Gandhi National Old Age Pension Scheme, the Rashtriya Vayoshri Yojana, Pradhan Mantri Vaya Vandana Yojana Senior Care Aging Growth Engines Initiative, that is the SAGE portal. We also have a toll-free helpline number called the Elder Line. Now, in this regard, there are a couple of suggestions that you can keep in mind. One very interesting idea is Switzerland's time bank. Now, what is Switzerland's time bank? Now, the concept is that let's say I am a young person and I have some free time. In my free time, I can volunteer to help any old person. That can be by buying ration for them, that can be by taking them to the hospital, that can be by just spending time with them, helping them with their household work, etc. Let's assume I spend 5 hours or 6 hours of my time for helping the older people. This time will be recorded by the government, and when I become old, I can now ask the government to send someone to help me for 5 hours because I had given this time when I was young. This is called a time bank. When you are young, you invest your time by helping the older people so that when you become old, you can ask the government, let's see, 30 years ago I helped a person for 10 hours, 20 hours, and now I want to reimburse that time. Now send someone for me to help me out. This is a very noble concept of time bank that is followed in Switzerland, which can be used. One other suggestion is that with increasing standard of living, people taking care of themselves in a much better way, we can also think about increasing the retirement age. Usually, the retirement age that is followed at government offices of 58 is not good enough. We see many people in their 60s, even in their 70s, who are very healthy, fit, and good enough to work. That also is a fact that we should take into consideration, and we should ensure that people who are fit enough to work, who are ready to work, should not become a burden on others as well. The next article is based on the language controversy once again. It came up after the Union Home Minister Mr. Amit Shah made a statement saying that Hindi should be used as a language for communication in non-Hindi speaking areas and not English. Now, ever since the minister made the statement, it has been objected to by many political parties in the opposition, especially from non-Hindi speaking states such as Tamil Nadu. Now, since the Home Minister is also the chairman of the Parliamentary Official Language Committee, that is why he made the statement. According to him, he is bound by the duty to promote the spread of Hindi language as is given in the constitution. The minister also said that I am being misunderstood. I am not saying that Hindi should replace the other Indian languages. Rather, what I am saying is Hindi should be used in place of English and not other local languages. In other words, he has assumed that English is not an Indian language. However, the article here says that the minister might be mistaken. Why? Because English has been recognized as the Indian language, just like many others like Tamil, Telugu, etc. Because the Sahitya Academy, which is under the control of Ministry of Culture, gives out annual awards even for the best works in English language that are written by Indians. Not just this, many states in India, specifically in the northeast part of India, have recognized English as the official language of their state. So to assume that English is not a part of the Indian culture and other languages and Hindi are is a mistake on behalf of the Minister of Union Home Affairs. The opposition party members have also pointed out that the English language has also been used to our advantage throughout the country. For example, the reason why Bangalore became India's IT hub was because of its usage and prevalence of English in the city. That is why all languages deserve the support of the state and not just Hindi. And that is why such statements should not be made in the future as per this article. We should promote the common language, we should promote the local languages also, but we should not discriminate against English, and English should be a part of our discourse as much as the other languages are. Now, the interesting part is that this is not the first time that such a statement is being made by Mr. Amit Shah. For example, in September 2019, the Home Minister said that there should be a common language for India and Hindi can unite the country. In fact, he made a similar statement in 2021 itself. And now the most recent statement, because of which the controversy has started, is people from different states should speak in Hindi, not English. Now, interestingly, when you say that there are a lot of Hindi speakers in India, you also have to understand that out of all the Hindi speakers, only 60% of them speak the native Hindi dialect. Thus, if you look at the entire population of the country, only 26% people speak native Hindi as their mother tongue. Other people who are considered as Hindi speakers are actually speaking in languages such as Rajasthani, Bhojpuri, Magdi, Haryanvi, Chhattisgarhi, that seems to be taken from Hindi, but it is not a Hindi language. So to assume that bulk of India speaks Hindi is a misconception that we should let go of. Also, because this topic remains in the news so much, let's see what are the constitutional provisions with regards to languages in India. Article 29 of Part 3 of the Constitution, which is the fundamental right, says that any section of citizens who have a distinct language, script or culture have the right to conserve the same. Not just this, the government of India in fact has also given distinction to certain languages and has called them classical languages. such as Kannada, Malayalam, Odia, Sanskrit, Tamil, and Telugu. Apart from this, Article 343 mainly talks about the status of Hindi as the official language of the Union. It says that Hindi in Devanagari script shall be the official language of the Union. So, as you know, India does not have any national language. We only have official language, that is Hindi and English at the Union government level. The same article also empowers the Parliament to make a law for continued use of English even after 25 Jan 1965. Means English was earlier only given a 15-year window to be used, and the idea was after 15 years are over, English will go away and Hindi will only remain as the official language. But the Parliament, even after 25 Jan 1965, has allowed continuous usage of English as the official language till today. In fact, after reorganization of states on linguistic basis, there was a constitutional amendment made and a new constitutional body came into being called Special Officer for Linguistic Minorities under Article 350B. This is an officer appointed by the President to investigate all the matters regarding safeguards for linguistic minorities specifically. The next article is about national education policy. In fact, inside the national education policy, this article is mainly focusing upon architecture related education. Now, the reason is that right now architecture is a 5-year course, and the national education policy that has been released now says that architecture should be a 3-year course, after which the students can go to industry, take up apprenticeship, take up different types of internships, learn with the experts, and they will become better architects after this. This is a policy change that many people from the architecture industry have not supported, and the author here is making a point in this regard. The author here says that architecture will have the most radical shift out of all the courses as per the national education policy. Now, let me tell you the main difference that will happen. Not just that the duration will reduce from 5 years to 3 years. At present, mainly the education of architecture is handled by a body called Council of Architecture, that is the COA. They are the ones who decide most of the framework of the courses. They are the ones who decide the quality of education, etc. Now, this body usually has a lot of professional architects. These architects are saying that now the Council of Architecture will not have this power, and the course structure, the framework of the course will be decided by a government body, which is something that we do not support. But the author here does not agree to this point. In fact, the author here is saying that the Council of Architecture has to be blamed for the poor training, low employability, and low quality of architects that we have been producing for many years now. If you look at the history of architecture as a course, architecture was considered as a part of technical education along with engineering, and it was a part of education ministry. Then it was under the AICTE, that is the All India Council for Technical Education, before it was brought under the Independent Council of Architecture. Now, the problem is, if you look at architecture as a field, ideally it should be under Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, right? Architects are the ones who are behind new structures that are coming up. How would they be designed? How would they work? But that was not done. Architecture courses still remain under the Education Ministry and not under the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. That is a major flaw in the policy that exists as per the author. The author says that the national education policy can have 4 major changes in the architecture course. First, it will improve the connection between education and profession, because lot more professionals will now be a part of these education courses. Secondly, the undergraduate courses are the ones where students should be trained and they should be helped to identify their path. Thus, the new kind of a policy allows that. How? Earlier, if you were enrolled in architecture course, you had to study for 5 years before you were passed out. Now you can change your field after 3 years also. If you don't like it, you can go and take up some other course as well. So new architecture policy allows you entry and exit at multiple points. Third, the current model trains only professional apprentice, while the national education policy will allow the students to take up research as well if they don't want to practice ahead. And fourth, institutions have been given much more autonomy to set up their own framework so that they are not under the control of the government. So, all in all, this author is in support of the changes being introduced by the National Education Policy in the architecture courses as against the demand that is being made by the architects. As I said, the NEP's mission to restructure the program as a 3-year liberal program is not going well with the architects. But shorter program will make sure that there are sufficient capacities for the students to go and work in the industry after 3 years. These 2 years can be used for on-job training that will make them a much better architect. That is something that India is missing now. Now, with fields such as architecture, it is always important to ensure that experts who are practicing architects come into the institutes, come into the colleges, and they start teaching the students because they bring in real world knowledge. But the problem is that when we bring professionals into the colleges and universities to teach, they're also required to do a lot of clerical work that the other teachers do. That has to change. Also, the experts have to be treated differently because they are not coming here full time. Their main job is something else, but they are coming to the institutes to help the students gain real world knowledge, and that is why they should be given a much more flexible method to work as compared to the present system. And the NEP, that is the National Education Policy, will make sure of that the experts now have a much more free hand at their teaching. Now, I'm sure all of you would have read about the National Education Policy multiple times ever since it came out in 2020. It is a very big policy, and that is why, since all these changes can't be introduced overnight, it also gives itself a 20-year time frame about which changes can be expected when exactly, and that is how we can evaluate whether the policy is successful or not. While this article mainly focused on architecture related provisions of the policy, for us it is more important to take a broader point of view about the different provisions of NEP. I am very sure that you would have already made a note of NEP and the important provisions. If not, it is very important. Please do make a note of the important provisions of the NEP. One of the provisions that I personally also like and would like to discuss with you again is the Academic Bank of Credits, that is the ABC. Now I'll come to ABC in just a bit. Just to give you a brief background, the evolution of education policy in India goes back to the time of our independence. The first University Education Commission was set up in 1948, followed by the second Education Commission, then the Education Commission under Dr. D.S. Kothari that led to India's first national education policy in 1968. Then we had the second education policy in 1986, which was remodeled and remodified in 1992. And now we have the 2020 new education policy that the government had released recently. Now, as I said, one of the most interesting concepts of the new education policy is the Academic Bank of Credit. Now, in very simple terms, let's assume right now you enroll yourself in an engineering course. It's a 4-year course. So, let's say after 2 years, I think that now I'm not interested to study further. I want to drop out and do something else. Let's say I want to open up a new business or I want to join a new course. I want to become a pilot all of a sudden. Now, if I leave after 2 years or if I leave after 3 years, I will not get any degree. I will not get any recognition from the college. If I join some other course, I will be considered as only class 12th pass. That is something that is now being changed. So after 1 year, after 2 years, after 3 years, after every year, you will get certain credits or certain points that will be given to you. So let's say in a 4-year course, you want to leave after 2 years. Then those points or those credits will be deposited in an account called your Academic Bank of Credit, and you will get a certificate accordingly that you only studied for 2 years. Even then you will get the certificate that you were here for 2 years and you studied these and these subjects, so that after 2 or 3 years, if you want to join a course again, you can straight away join from the 3rd year. That is what the Academic Bank of Credit will be. It will keep a record of your academic credits. It will not accept any documents from you. The college or the university would have to register you, and they would give a record of how much student has studied here, so that there can be deposits made in your account. In very simple terms, you can use this to have an admission in the middle of a course later on whenever you want it. That is the concept of academic bank of credit. Now, even if you leave a course of 4 years, after 1 year, 2 year or 3 year, you will still have some degree, you will still have something at least to show in return, and you can still resume this in the future. This is again a part of the National Education Policy of 2020. These are the important articles on today's Hindu newspaper. Now a couple of practice questions. Number 1. Multiple crises across the world present an opportunity for India to take a seat at the high table and establish itself as a trusted mediator and peacemaker. Discuss. Second, an essential part of being a welfare economy is ensuring proper maternal and elderly care. Discuss some of the provisions in place to ensure proper care to the concerned population. Both these questions have to be answered within 250 words each. Thank you so much for watching the video.